Okay, tēnā koutou everybody. I'm Stephanie Lees from the New Zealand Music Commission. It's giving me great pleasure this afternoon to introduce you to Dean Merlino from Australia. Dean started off in Perth and he's gradually heading towards New Zealand. He's now residing in Melbourne and he works at a very interesting institute. It's called the Centre for Cultural Partnerships. And this is the part of the Melbourne University. They actually offer a master's program in community music. Or is it all community arts? Yeah, community arts. And which I don't know that we actually have here in this country, so that's pretty exciting. I actually did a bit of an internet search on Dean. They gave me these notes, but I'm going to bypass those. Because what I found really interesting was an interview he did a few years ago about creativity. And I'd recommend you all went home and had a look at The Big Idea in 2010, I think it was, in that interview. Because I think for all of us, he's got some very, very interesting things to say about that too. I believe today, however, in the first part of this, he's going to talk to us about the challenges for us as community practitioners, the current sort of challenges in the arts and our engagement with community. So I'm going to hand over to him because I know that time will fly. Chris Archer is going to run around with the microphone so that you can ask intelligent questions and that we can actually all hear them. So it's going to be a kind of engaging type lecture, this one. So get ready to be engaged. Over to you, Dean.
Good afternoon, and I hope you've all been having a fantastic day so far today. I've been having a wonderful time. Thank you to Stephanie for her kind words. A couple of points about my presentation today. First, no PowerPoint. I'm a musician. I just don't care for the visual fetish of most artists. I did once try a couple of presentations where I made a soundscape to go along with my presentation. It just kind of freaked people out a bit. And I found that as the music got to people's emotions, then they just took on wholesale everything I said. So to spare you that humiliation by the time you get home, there'll be no sound or anything today. I'm going to talk for about 10 minutes and then basically throw open to a discussion. Hopefully we can engage in a discussion. And as stated earlier, Chris will have a microphone for you, or you can just bellow. I think it's a pretty echoey auditorium here. So I run the only CCD or community arts program in Australia. It's a master's level program, a graduate program. I run the coursework masters. It's 2-year masters. We also have a research masters and a PhD program. So at any one time, I think I have the best job in community practice in Australia, because at any one time I'm engaged with over 50 practitioners who form a community of people who are all trying to push their practice to the limits, to find new space of practice, to explore new ways of thinking about practice. So every time I walk into work, I'm engaged with all these new ideas, new ways of thinking, and it's constantly challenging me and constantly changing how I think. It's making us often rewrite the curriculum to keep up with how the students are thinking. So one of the things that I've noticed, especially with our students who work with young people in their practice, is that not only do we face challenges from within our sector, if you want to think about it as a sector, we face challenges as we merge our arts sector and the youth sector together, but also a lot of challenges that transform that landscape for us often come from outside of our practice. And suddenly we're faced with ways of having to rethink, reimagine practice, and to often do that on the fly. So what I thought I would do today is to look at this idea, this underlying idea that often the landscape changes under our feet and we have to respond quite quickly to that. And also to look at a few areas where that's happening, and then to basically throw open to everyone to just have a bit of a chat about that. I'm interested in reflecting on this idea of these two categories of young people and the arts coming together. So I want to consider recent changes in technology, and specifically what I like to call the democratization of technology. Early technological developments began with the exclusive and often expensive hardware. As that technology developed, slowly became more readily available, and consequently, as more units were sold, it eventually became cheaper, meaning that more people could own their own pieces of hardware. For a long time, software, especially those pertaining to the arts, still remained the exclusive domain of those who could afford it. Experts functioned as middlemen and were still necessary for many creative processes. The challenge to this creative gatekeeping began with the launch of Apple's iMac in the late 1990s. Soon Apple produced the iLife suite with elements such as GarageBand, etc., that began to undercut the gatekeepers of creativity. Add to that the cracking and then illegal distribution of high-end products such as Final Cut Pro, Dreamweaver, etc., that then gave professional art-making tools to everyone. This democratising process gives unprecedented access to many young people to unmediated means of creativity, unmediated by commercial gatekeepers, but also, in a sense, unmediated by professional art workers. The advertising campaigns of Apple for its iLife suite is all about being able to engage creatively without any mediation at all. Add to this the proliferation of how-to videos on YouTube, uploading capabilities, and the need to engage in the arts. The role of the art worker is at risk of further diminishing. So its first idea I want to bring to our attention is the democratisation of technology, which changes our landscape. Technology has also produced new challenges to the claims upon story and storytelling by art and community practice in the forms of computer gaming and anime. Computer games have come a long way since Space Invaders of my day. Now both local and online gaming experiences provide enormous landscapes and endless choices that have both physical and moral consequences. Importantly, gaming storytelling is very future-focused, as one is immersed in the gaming world and personality development. Storytelling in community practice, though also temporal, is often historically focused. We encourage the telling of stories of the past and our journeys into the present, but it is harder and therefore rarer to engage with potential futures. Within an albeit limited world, gaming encourages an enormous amount of future-directed decision-making and storytelling. Anime, on the other hand, brings a playfulness and emotionality to both male and female characters, is often comfortable now portraying strong female characters, and engages with youth issues in very complex and drawn-out series that can last from 13 to 52 half-hour episodes, or exploring particular issues pertinent to young people over a span of 6 to up to 26 or 30 hours of storytelling. While not telling their own stories per se in this format, young people can explore issues and their own development by associating with certain characters. Also, both gaming and anime have spawned huge global online communities that give young people an international community belonging and a sense of identity that is often difficult to compete with. So the second challenge, I think, for our sector and our engagement with young people comes from these other forms of storytelling, other forms of social engagement, other forms of engagement with young people that are actually developing very sophisticated models of how to engage with story, how to engage people to tell their story, how to engage people to explore story worlds in their imagination. A third challenge to youth arts is the growing hybridity of art forms, possibly derived from the increasing experimentation with music videos and the theatricality of pop concerts. Performative art forms now easily combine music, dance, stories, role-playing and video into a complex blend of performance styles reminiscent of Wagner's prediction of total art. Again, technology in the form of multimedia has melted the fixed boundaries of the fine arts and encouraged a more complex and interactive experience. This hybridity is putting pressure on singular art practices as expectations by participants are raised. So a third challenge, I think, to the landscape of our practice revolves around this notion of hybridity. The expectation, especially from a lot of young people, and again, I think a lot of technology has driven this expectation, that we are able to explore creativity, explore their imagination through a whole number of art practices simultaneously. Finally, though in one sense an extension of the previous point, is the dissolution between the high arts and popular arts. This is easily understood in music with the growing interaction between classical, jazz, rock and electronic musicians, all of whom are trying to push their boundaries of their art forms and all of whom have found each other in various ways. And magazines like Wire, which has been around for 15 years or so, has been a critical format in pushing this collapse of divisions or these silos between high art and communal arts and contemporary arts. But also in a more performative sphere, troupes such as Rimini Protocol from Germany are creating works that are considered cutting edge by both high and community artists. So this final point I want to make is about the dissolution of what was for a long time fixed forms between definitions of, or social definitions of arts practice, the high arts, community arts, popular arts, traditional arts. So my interest is reflecting on these challenges is twofold. First, how will they change the ways or even the reasons young people have for engaging with us to make art? And second, how can we as practitioners embrace or respond to them? So I'd like to throw open to you now and get some responses to those ideas to see if we can start to map out a way that we can explore these issues.
I was just talking to Selena here. I'm Lynn. I just don't see them as challenges or blocks or anything like that at all to working with young people. I just think they're opportunities. If someone's in their bedroom or their kitchen or their living room making a movie or making a soundtrack or, I don't know, doing whatever they do, fantastic, bring it on. You know, I don't see it as a challenge. I just see it as an opportunity, and what we have a responsibility to do as people who are working in the arts, and I'm particularly talking for an organisation, is just keep providing platforms where those young people can bring whatever they're doing into what we're doing, and so on and so forth, etc.
Does someone want to respond to that?
I thought one of the boundaries that was being pushed was about our arts practice, and I think trained musicians often find that all the time. I mean, I do a lot of songwriting, I put people in doing that, and you know, when I hear yet another loop using the same 4 chords, that desire to move people away from a very simple palette of timbre or sound, those sort of things, it's quite hard sometimes to engineer that because you're stuck within a sort of some commercial parameters or loop programs or something like that. I think that is one of the challenges sometimes of that technology, to open up the creativity, which is instantly possible, you know, to produce something that sounds quite good in music. It's actually to get kids to move to a bigger picture. But
at some point, those people come out of their bedrooms or, you know, the kitchen or whatever, and they get involved in another project that's happening, and they bring with them their thing that they've been working on, and we offer them then where they can go next with that. But so entering into that thing and mucking around for ages doing your own thing, I think is great. And then bring it to us and let's do something with it. Or you're doing that in your room with this technology, and a friend of yours hears it and goes, oh, you should be getting involved with what these people are doing, because actually there's something there between you that you could share, and you'll take it there and you'll learn more, and it'll get whatever, it'll be richer. That's what I think.
So that in some way shifts practice away from being a primary engagement with young people to then being a secondary engagement.
No, because the time that you meet them is your primary engagement. So yes. What they're doing beforehand, that's great, whatever. You can't control what people do.
No, not that I think you can control it, but I think then that shifts some expectations for us, where the initial engagement for a lot of young people begins with the technology, and then they discover that they can expand, as you said, out of their bedroom.
I think that regardless of whether they are or not, they can still come out of the room and engage in real time with arts practitioners and have an amazing time.
I think when I talked about challenges, as I said at the start, I didn't mean challenges in a negative sense.
No, I know.
But challenges as something that is impacting upon our sector that we need to be aware of. Those impacts could be positive, negative, whatever.
Yeah, so it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity to find out from them what is really interesting about doing that and engaging with those technologies and getting them to feed that back into us.
Yes.
So then we can re-offer it in an even better way. Perhaps.
Sometimes, yeah.
Yeah, maybe,
Yeah.
because I don't know what it is that they're doing. So, anyway, moving on.
I've got a daughter in intermediate. She's got a lead role in Susical. That's in terms of she's rehearsing. So she's researching hundreds of YouTube video clips of other children rehearsing and performing and interpreting their interpretation of this particular musical, or if she composes on the guitar, and so she's constantly looking for other kids that are doing the same thing and looking for I don't know, is that your question?
So a type of imitation is then coming out of that practice.
Yeah.
Is that changing their notion of being creative, or is it, because there's an interesting nexus between imitation and creativity?
Possibly. I can't really answer that.
One thing I notice a lot from our students that do a lot of practice with young people is, I think, following from Stephanie's point, the ease of the technology actually can lead to a simplification of the creative process. And I agree with the point being made over this side. We are then, in some ways, charged with the need to then encourage young people to step out of some of those more limiting spheres that technology actually locks them into, which, in times where young people would engage directly with arts practitioners rather than being mediated through technology, it was much easier then to work and to push that forward. We have another question over here.
Mine is about broadband for the country of New Zealand. And before moving to Southland, we're very privileged with the technology that we have. I lived in a rural area in Tasman District. We're part of an effort for a 10-year plan to that district. And in their 10-year plan, Tasman District did not even address the need for broadband.
So even though a lot of technology has become more ubiquitous, then it forces pressure on people to then be able to have to afford it, monthly plans, etc. And that creates a big problem. And then certain areas, and often there becomes a class issue around this, but then certain areas simply get left out because everyone starts from the top and works their way down, and then with a new piece of technology, everyone just jumps to the top again and works down. So before technology has been rolled out to across the whole social spectrum, something new has come along and it goes back to the upper end of the spectrum before it gets anywhere, which is very problematic. I think in some ways that's also problematic for creative engagement, because it means that people are struggling then to have access to a whole range of ways of engaging creatively that are then becoming more and more expected.
I'm from capital E in Wellington, and creativity, particularly in creative technology, and one of the trends that we've found over the course of time is that it used to be kind of even 10 years ago that the motivation even for the students at that stage, definitely for the teachers who brought them into our TV studios and our digital media labs, the motivation was very much about learning a process, and out of that might come a product, and there was no expectation, or not a great expectation, put on that product. There's been quite a shift over that time, and through the power of technology, it's much easier to create a product. It's much easier to not, as a creator, have an investment in the process for a couple of different reasons. One is because the processing power of technology does a lot of that for you. The other is that those processes change so quickly now that it's a waste of time to invest a lot of time learning all of the shortcuts on a piece of software, or even learning a particular input device, all of the techniques around that, because it will be superseded, and the expectation of the kids themselves is that will be superseded, that it is temporary, it is interim, and there'll be changes coming, not just within their lifetime, within the year, and they're always looking out for those new changes. So I guess the challenge for us is how do you get that investment in the quality of the product when the process is so transient?
My concern about that is that it winds up creating a rapid-fire obsession with output, recognising that the technology will obsolesce very quickly, and therefore there's no point in learning a lot of functionality or spending 6 months to a year really getting to know something, because in the end you're just going to ditch it for something else and buy something else. So you just try and spit out simple product as quickly as you can to then hopefully have used the technology you've paid for enough to get your money's worth before then engaging with another piece of technology. I think that is a problem, and in some ways creates then a reliance on the product developers to sort a lot of problems out which we would normally apply our own imaginative or creative thinking to work around. So Would you see that as a gradual kind of dumbing down process? That's part of my concern.
Possibly as brokers or as arts practitioners, we can bring a depth of craft to any of those products, and hopefully we can impart the importance of that, and that we can, through example, there's the opportunity to show how an investment in crafting something with whatever tools are available at the time, whatever the processes are, an investment in that crafting is going to make for a better product, is going to make for a deeper product. So.
We will often, and arts colleges will still talk about, the creative genius and these sorts of very 19th century romantic notions. And yet we discover when we engage with most young people that so much of what goes on is about learning a craft. But then technology is changing that relationship to craft very quickly, I think.
Well, that picks up on, before you talked about imitation, and you seem to be derisive of that, like you're seeing a lot of imitation as a negative thing. And yet historically in the arts, imitation has been the way young and emerging practitioners have actually cut their teeth, learnt the craft and found their own voice. So I don't think there's any difference. I think it's the same tool, it's the same processes really. And I agree with Jeff, what Jeff said is that what we always forget is audiences have a huge contribution to make in shaping work and developing work, and that an intelligent and inquisitive mind will actually work with that. Someone wants to work with that and push that further and push their own work further. And then there'll be the person who just wants to produce to survive. And we're right at the beginning of all of this intersection. I think we're going to see extraordinary, wonderful stuff happen.
I think it still has a lot to play out. Yes.
Absolutely, but I think that's very exciting.
I think what we see as the risk of imitation, or the very same situation that creates the risk of imitation, creates a massive opportunity for collaboration.
Yep.
And it's a matter of kind of directing that and focusing that so that imitation is imitation plus. So it's adding each time, and we're adding that dialogue or a multi-log that's occurring, and better product is coming out of it.
Yeah, I have a very mixed relationship with imitation. In one sense, in my art training, I tend to think about imitation as something to strive through and then out of, and yet in another sense, culturally, if there's no imitation, then cultures die out. So, imitation is actually, in some ways, it's something that we think of breaking out of, and in another way, it's something that we understand is necessary as an underpinning for a lot of cultural activities.
I see that as being absolutely central to what we have to do as educators to develop that critical ability with young people, with students, so that they're making increasingly good decisions, I guess, about the kind of work that they're producing, as opposed to just using the technology to quickly produce whatever it may be. And I think that critical engagement enables them to, whatever the technology is, make good work, whether it's with a very basic analogue, whatever it may be, through to highly complex digital whatever. That creative ability and that critical ability that's going to dictate whether it's quality or whether it's just a bad imitation of someone else's good stuff.
I love this idea of critical and critical engagement. Are people comfortable with the term? I often find a lot of people, they love the idea of critical engagement being a really important part of the whole creative process or the educative process. Then a lot of other people I find have a much more, I guess you would call it, intuitive approach, and so for them, their fear is a critical engagement then begins to bring the conscious mind too much into the process that they think should be unconscious, non-conscious, and then they panic about this idea of critical engagement.
In terms of an example of technology output, we're working with them on animations, 3D, 4D animation programs and software. The teacher is an artist who we'd worked with before on art projects, and he wanted to give his technology students a art outcome from their learning of the technology. And so we'll be doing installations of their works in the public spaces of our gallery. And what he wants them to learn out of it is that criticality of more than just the nuts and bolts that go into making a wireframe program that's cloaked with something, etc. And that's ongoing. I mean, no matter, even if you're working on a tape-to-tape editing machine or we're working with the latest version of Final Cut Pro, you're still editing. You're still building something out of those decisions of what stays and what goes. So some things in technology will always, the principles will always be the same. And the outcomes in terms of, does it work? Is it quality? Is it contributing to culture or our society, will be answered by the people who view it.
Because in one sense that's still necessary, that notion of the critical, which also implies the capacity for aesthetic judgment in one way, becomes critical regardless of whether you use no tools at all or you use the most cutting edge tools available.
One of the projects that I'm involved in is with 10 to 18-year-olds in a creative space. So they've got full Adobe Suite and they do gaming and they produce music and all that kind of thing. And they're familiar with all those processes, but there's such a big difference between editing and knowing how to edit and everything else, and the notion of critical assessment, peer review, and actually reflection on their own work, because they're not doing that. They don't have the artists to model that behaviour from. And in high schools as well, I don't know, my very limited experience of a high school, there's not enough. If there is focus on critical thinking, then there's not enough focus on risk-taking.
I think in one sense, the space that I see that brings the critical and the risk-taking together is in gaming with the whole modding community. So you take a game that Activision has put out, and then after you've got bored with it, you then start to rewrite the open source program, remake things of the game, upload it onto websites. People can then download it onto their version of the game and actually play very different versions of games that were invented by, and now the games developers actually encourage modding communities around their games because it gives their games more longevity, etc. It spices up the gameplay once it starts to get boring, etc. And I think there's a degree of risk-taking, but there's also a degree of critical judgment to make something that you think will actually enthrall other modders.
I mean, I don't really know anything about gaming, so I had this idea that it was quite passive, so to hear it being more of an active engagement, to me, does make it more interesting from a creative standpoint. And this, things like Instagram came up before, so I think that there is this sort of sense, if you take this photograph and your phone or camera or whatever puts a filter on it, that you've made something creatively interesting, but when it's something that kind of happens to your photograph rather than something that you've kind of actively engaged in, then the kind of limitations are quite great in terms of your own creative satisfaction. For me, when I'm sort of at my most interested and when I have the most creative joy is when I'm the most active. And I think that technologies have potential for, obviously that full range of active to passive, but often people get stuck in the quite passive space. So just coming back to one of your earlier questions of how can we facilitate people who are in this sort of heavily technology-focused space, then maybe that's our role, is to encourage more active participation.
I like that idea of a split between, or not a split, but two types of creativity being active and passive. I think certainly for the performing arts, the notion of creativity is very much active. And in some ways, technology is transforming, certainly around music, into a more passive type of art making, and a much more passive type of performing as well. I don't know if you've ever been to electronica gigs where someone will sit on the stage with a bank of computer screens and hit enter, and then they just sit there and drink their beer while the music plays. And it's not a particularly enthralling concert. But that, even the notion of being on stage is becoming more passive as technology changes. Sorry.
I think the online thing is a dialogue. It enables a conversation. I mean, it's a global conversation. And I don't think we should be worried about it too much because it provides a lot of background and it gives them confidence in their own bedroom practice or whatever to go out and play real music with other people.
I'm quite fascinated by online communities and the way it's completely changing the geographical notion of community that often underpinned a lot of notions of community and community practice. And I think we're working now to get a much better understanding of what community means through these much more globalised networks of belonging and identity.
Can we give Dean a round of applause? Thank you.